Hi, welcome back, guys. This is your friend, the Mama Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is this series of What If Deku the Hero's Return. Izuku casually stretched his arms and legs, luxuriating in all the space at the back of the room, while most other students jostled closer to the starting line. He eyed the opening, narrow, but more than high enough to slip through over everyone else. He saw Tsuyu and Ochako eyeing that opening as well. For all that he appeared relaxed on the outside, Izuku felt wildly anxious within. He felt all too conscious of the hostile eyes, staring him down with impassive disdain from the announcers' booths, the crowds of civilians and heroes in the stands silently judging him, and Midnight eyeing him with worry as she explained the rules of the race to the audience. Taking a deep breath, Izuku reminded himself of his plan. Don't hurt anyone. Don't show off. Win. Simple. Gives the announcers as little to work with as possible without compromising his promise. The moment Midnight called a start to the race, ice rushed across the floor, sticking most people in place. A few had leapt in time, and others were strong enough to pull themselves free. Izuku had darted past the giant robots before the ice had left Todoroki's shoe. Limiting himself to Jeppo and Soru, Izuku ignored the narrow beams and stony platforms entirely in favor of hopping across the air. He could have done the same for the minefield, or simply blow up the mines with a shockwave. But instead, he sprinted through, nimbly dodging every faint electrical signal in the ground. Before he reached the finish line, a loud crash made him look back. A zero-pointer, frozen over, tipped precariously over the racecourse. Izuku flickered into lightning and covered the distance in the blink of an eye. He materialized beneath the giant robot, hands outstretched. To his surprise, the robot felt a lot lighter than it looked. And Midoriya turned back around at the finish line. The UA announcer called out. Looks like he thinks so little of his fellow students that he feels the need to lap them to show off. Izuku kicked himself for ruining his own plan. But it didn't stop him from lifting the robot higher. Hey, thanks for the save, man. Kirishima gently slapped him on the back. Wasn't sure if my quirk would hold up against that. You would have been fine. I think they made these lighter so nobody would get hurt. Huh. Makes sense. Kirishima kept running, and others ran under the robot as well. Izuku kept holding it up, waiting for everyone to pass so he could set it down. One student, however, stayed under the robot. Aren't you going to race? Izuku asked. Monoma smiled. Oh, but I am. The way I see it, 1B stands no chance of victory so long as you remain in the competition. He spread his arms wide and said, so long as you aren't able to finish the race, I win. Izuku grinned back. Guess I'll have to win while holding this robot then. Monoma's jaw went slack as Izuku raised the rest of the robot off the ground and started running. He couldn't even Soru with that much weight, much less Jeppo, and there was no way the beams would support the robot's weight. But the chasm offered a solution to Izuku's robot problem. He hurled the robot into the pit, collapsing a pillar in the process, and leapt across it to the other side. Todoroki and Bakugo were neck and neck, plowing through the mines, just a handful of steps from victory, when a verdant streak of lightning darted between them. And despite fooling around as much as he did, Midoriya still won the race. One has to wonder what UA intends to do about his arrogant attitude. The applause was lukewarm at best. Izuku decided it could have been worse. Once they announced how many points he would have around his headband for the next round, Bakugo wasn't the only one glaring. He had a whole crowd fighting to be on his team, but he parted them simply by walking up to Mei. Think your babies can take on the whole school? Mei grinned. You know they can. Amidst the sea of pleading faces, Kirishima stood awkwardly towards the back. Izuku hopped over to him and said, You want in? We'll be fighting everyone here. Kirishima slammed his fist together. Bring it on. Izuku hunted for a fourth member. He had half the hero students jockeying closer to him, with Mainta at the front. A part of him wanted to take Todoroki, but he already had a group of his own. Ojiro and Shoji also had teams, leaving him without any palatable options. In the fringes of the crowd, he saw a scruffy-haired Gen Ed student he vaguely recognized not eyeing him, but the people in the periphery of the crowd. Figuring it was better than nothing, Izuku jeppoed by his side and said, "I need a fourth person. You want in?" Shinso narrowed his eyes. "What, taking pity on the general course nobody? If I wanted a pity case on my team, I'd take Mainta. You had a plan, and it didn't involve me. It caught my eye." After a moment's thought, Shinso said, "If it gets me a shot at the hero course, I'll take it." "Then welcome aboard." As the teams assembled, Bakugo and Todoroki eyed the 1,000,000 points hungrily, but the rest of the teams pointedly ignored him. Izuku shook his head. If they lacked the ambition to go for first prize, he'd have to give them more incentive. Once the round began, Izuku blurred away. The other teams stopped short, their riders suddenly shouting out. As they turned and looked around, Izuku held every single headband aloft for everyone to see. "You want a headband?" Izuku called out. His voice boomed across the stadium like a clap of thunder. He raised 1 foot high and slammed it into the ground, burying it ankle-deep in the stone. He did the same with his other foot and shouted, "Then come and get it." Kirishima did the same with his hardened feet. He didn't quite bury them, but the message came through clearly. Mei's backpack jammed metal poles into the ground, anchoring her as well. As Izuku placed the bundle of headband atop Shinso's brow, the general course student sighed. "Well, can't complain, I won't get enough attention." "And would you look at that?" the announcer shouted. "Midoriya isn't content with his 1,000,000 points. He wants all of them." But it seems like he bit off more than he could chew. The crowd seemed hesitant, unsure whether to cheer or to boo. The stadium hung in silence, every group eyeing the mountain of headbands guarded by Midoriya, yet none willing to make the first move. Bakugo's explosions broke the silence. He came charging through the air, screaming at the top of his lungs. Mei unsheathed her ironclad sword, modified from their winnings in Skypia. Gray vapor billowed at the end of the hilt and formed a long, flat club. Mei flicked her wrist, and the cloud batted Bakugo back at his teammates like a giant tennis racket. Ice barreled towards Kirishima. Izuku lashed out with his lightning, and the two elements clashed on the ground. Ice shattered into a fine powder, and the electricity kept rushing forward. Kaminari blocked the attack with his own electricity, shorting himself out in the process. Kirishima struggled as vines wrapped around his feet. "A little help here," he shouted. Mei threw him a dial. Fire shot from the end, torching the vines while only leaving scorch marks on his hardened skin. Kirishima flicked the device forward, and a tongue of flame halted Tsuyu's own tongue in its tracks. Two horns soared overhead, darting for the headbands. Izuku batted them aside with lightning, and Pony yelped when she felt the shock. Manga's kanji got blasted apart when Mei pulled out a miniature railgun, and Kirishima held his ground against a combined barrage of scales and blades. Shinso ducked as fire and shadows leapt for him. "Can't exactly use my quirk like this." "And that is?" Shinso hesitated, unwilling to reveal his secret. In his distraction, Dark Shadow grabbed a headband and snuck back to Takoyami. "I got it," the phantom quirk crowed. "Let's book it before they figure out I took the sentient quirk froze when it saw the number, with significantly fewer digits than it thought. "But I thought I—" Izuku met the quirk's eyes as he passed the 1,000,000-point headband back to Shinso, and he winked. The cavalry battle devolved into a sluggish melee, as all the competing teams either chased after Takoyami's group or hounded closer to Izuku's group, scenting blood in the water with that first loss of a headband. Tsuyu had better luck sneaking her tongue past Izuku a second time. But otherwise, between Mei's gadgets, Kirishima's stalwart defense, and Izuku's flickers of lightning, No one else came close. As the last remaining seconds ticked by, a massive explosion rocked the stadium. Bakugo came screaming at Izuku's team like a choleric rocket and blasted the other teams aside. Izuku flung a lightning whip at him, and Mei fired a net launcher. Bakugo angled his hands and made a corkscrew through the air, neatly dodging both projectiles. His hands closed around fabric and tugged with a single second left on the clock. Bakugo crash landed once the siren went off. "Yes," he shouted. "Suck it, Deku. I got the 1,000,000 points." The students around him snickered, and Zero facepalmed. "Dude, get your eyes checked." Bakugo, confused by everyone's reaction, examined his headband. The grinding of his teeth was audible from the stands. As the crowd exploded with applause, the announcers seemed completely at a loss for words. Clearing his throat, the announcer awkwardly said, "In fourth place, with 135 points, Team Bakugo." Bakugo's sweat turned the headband to ash between his fingers. Third and second place teams got their scores tallied. Then the announcer said, "And taking the opportunity to curb stomp all his fellow students, Midoriya steals first place with over 1,000,000 points." The general audience seemed split between bad-mouthing Izuku and cheering for his wild success despite the critical commentary. But the heroes perched high above in the stands. The ones that weren't glaring at the commentators' booths were giving Izuku considering, or even awestruck looks. We will now take a 30-minute break to get the final event sorted. In the meantime, please feel free to stretch your legs, grab a snack from the concession stands, and enjoy a word from our sponsors. As advertisements came over the loudspeakers, Izuku followed the other remaining students into the break room. He snagged a whole pile of snacks and devoured them with gusto. Mei tightened the screws on her boots, and Shinso plopped into a purple puddle on the nearest bleacher. "I'm never teaming up with you again," Shinso said as he flopped face first onto the table and closed his eyes. "Ha! If you think that was bad, you should have seen that fight on Drum Island against the Whitebeards. Felt like Pirate Normandy. One of these days, we're going to get an actual backstory out of you," Kirishima said amiably. "What is it with you and pirates? We fell on their ship, and the rest was history." "Not telling." "Gotcha. So, who do you think is coming in second place?" Izuku raised an eyebrow. "Not going to say you'll beat me." Kirishima laughed. "I've seen your workout routine. You've got this in the bag. So, second place. Depends on the bracket and how much effort Mei's putting into the tournament." Mei patted her backpack. It clanged with a thick metal sound. "I have babies I want to test out on you." "Then Mei, as long as she's not in my bracket." Kirishima raised a finger, poised to speak. Then he remembered all the gadgets tossed his way, and how effectively she dealt with the horde of point-hungry students, and slowly lowered it. "And for our first match of the final round, Izuku Midoriya versus Mei Hatsune." "Huh. Kinda wish they would have put us later." Mei smirked. "Guess the HPSC wants to kick off the final event by bad-mouthing you for beating up a support student." "Isn't the sorting random?" Shinso asked. "I'd hope so, but there's reason to believe they're not." Shinso snorted. "That full of yourself, huh? Thinking the government's out to get you comes with being a pirate." While Shinso digested that unusual answer, the announcers called out, "If Midoriya does not make his way onto the field in the next 30 seconds, he will be." Izuku flashed onto the stage. The announcer trailed off, then said, "All right, folks, looks like we're about to witness a one-sided beatdown. The only support course student, up against the tyrant of 1A, Izuku Midoriya. Lame. The Marines gave me a better epithet. At least they bothered giving you one. I'm just that one support course chick." Izuku rolled his neck and cracked his knuckles. "Well, Mei, you know what I had in mind for the sports festival? I want to win, but I can't go all out. So, I'm finishing this before you get the chance to try anything." which is a load of shit. Luffy would knock you senseless by running away from a good fight. While Izuku was stunned by Mei's words, her backpack opened with a pneumatic hiss. Metal plates unfolded from its interior, forming a bulky chassis around Mei. The pants on her legs changed color and expanded, forming tubular metal legs, and the gauntlets around her arms expanded to match. The crowd gasped as the mecha forming around Mei lumbered to a towering 30 feet. One metallic hand opened an ironclad dial, unfurling a massive smoky sword, while the barrel embedded in the other arm whirred ominously. "Well, Izuku?" Mei's voice boomed out over the mech's intercom. "What do you think?" "I think I liked it better when I was the one using your babies. Keep this in one piece, and I'll let you take it for a spin later." The Gatling gun spat out a volley of rounds. Izuku held his ground, only to get blasted across the arena. His feet stamped into the arena's edge, and he barely stopped himself from hitting the far wall. Izuku threw a lightning spear. The electricity flowed harmlessly across the metal shell and dispersed into the ground. "Nice try," Mei said. "But the mech is perfectly insulated, and the whole thing runs on pneumatics." The sword slammed down at Izuku's feet. Izuku flickered forward, cutting underneath the sword, and threw a haki-coated punch at Mei's torso. The metal barely dented, and Izuku had to sprint away as Mei's Gatling gun fired bullets in his wake. "You know what's nice about rubber rounds?" Mei asked. "They bounce." Izuku was confused for a moment as Mei aimed off to the side. Confusion turned to panic as the bullets ricocheted off the walls in a million different directions. With the arena walls perfectly straight, the bouncing bullets stayed level with the arena until they hit each other, Mei's mech or Izuku. The mech weathered the storm of bullets without a scratch, but even with the bullets bleeding energy through the air and walls, they still had enough punch to leave bruises on Izuku's arms and chest. Izuku dropped, avoiding the worst of the bullet spread, but Mei simply swept her cloud sword along the ground. Izuku went flying into the air and dodged aside as Mei kept firing at him. "You're bound to run out of bullets sooner or later." "Yeah, but that's the beauty of rubber rounds. They're very easy to reuse." The iron cloud swept along the ground again, this time scooping up discarded rubber bullets and dumping them into a hatch on the back of her mech. As the gun whirred up again, Izuku shouted, "That's completely unfair. So is that quirk of yours. Do you have any idea how hard it is to make a collapsible, self-assembling mech that runs completely without electricity? I have to move and aim everything by hand. I don't even want to use my quirk for this. I'm trying not to make everything worse." "Screw that. What are they going to do? Not let you be a hero? Just spit in their eye and do it anyways." Seeing the cloud sweep along the ground, Izuku decided to make reloading harder. Plunging like a meteor, Izuku punched straight into the arena. The stone buckled and cracked, making the terrain even and leaving plenty of places for rubber bullets to get stuck. "A good idea. Too bad I already thought about that." The cloud swept through, but this time it moved more fluidly. Seeping into the cracks, it washed up the rubber rounds. As it dumped back in, Izuku noticed a few stones getting swept along for the ride. They still shot out with the rubber rounds, but those shattered on impact. Wondering what would happen if a larger rock got in the hatch, Izuku raced along the ground, grabbed a fist-sized stone, and soared behind Mei. Hatches popped along the back, and rubber nets leapt with a pneumatic hiss. But Izuku wove the stone past her defenses and into the hatch a second before it closed. Mei fired another burst of rounds, but the barrel made a clunking sound as the stone got caught. Izuku victoriously pumped a fist, but Mei simply pulled a lever. "Trying to jam up the Gatling gun?" Mei asked. "Guess I'll use the artillery then." The barrel widened. Caught with his pants down, Izuku braced his legs into the ground and channeled haki into his chest. A deafening boom rocked the stadium as a large rubber ball broke the sound barrier and slammed into Izuku. The arena split in half from the force, pushing one cracked slab off the raised platform, and a cloud of dust rose where Izuku had stood. Mei searched the arena. She looked high and checked below, hunting for any stray spark. Don't tell me you'd rather throw in the towel than show off a little. You're not that little Deku anymore, Izuku. You didn't let the world government bully you around. So why let some stupid little hero management paper pushers make you hide? I promised you the finest support gear, and you promised to be the #1 hero. Don't you chicken out now that we made it back. Did she do it? The announcer asked, incredulous. I don't see him. A blow rocked her mech. Mei turned. Her right leg buckled from a blow to the joint, and another punch sent her mech kneeling. What's going on? Can he turn invisible too? Over in the stands, Hagakure shouted. He better not. Mei grinned as she saw a stray green spark dance across her metallic arm. That's more like it. Firing up the one electronic device she had, Mei sent out an M. It fried a few cell phones in the audience, but it also forced Izuku out of her mech. Scrambling to his feet, Izuku leapt away as the ground around him was peppered with rubber munitions. The sword swept down in his path, carving a huge gash into the arena floor. Izuku darted under its edge like a batter stealing home base, then turned and punched the mech's wrist. The mechanical arm buckled under the first blow, the metal warping and cracking along its joints. The other arm, still tracking Izuku's position, fired an artillery round right into the arm's joint. The arm blew off in a shower of metal shrapnel and torn rubber. Using the shrapnel for cover, Izuku leapt through the air. He raised 1 foot high into the air, and he kicked down with the other, propelling himself beyond terminal velocity. Thanks, Mei. I think you're right about not hiding, but even this can't make me go all out. Bolt kick. With a clap of thunder, Izuku's haki-coated leg slammed into the mech's left shoulder. The arm remained intact, but the rhythmic purring of the gun's barrel guttered to a stop as the pinched tubing jammed its internal components. Bereft of both arms, Mei lashed out with a leg as Izuku righted himself. Its rubber-tipped toes caved in Izuku's chest and sent him careening across the arena. As he bounced across the broken stone, Izuku dug his fingers into a crevice. His body stretched out like taffy until he snapped back together with a static crackle. The eyes on Mei's mech lit up. Izuku yelped as a laser beam turned the stone to slag. You put laser eyes on it, Izuku shouted. Of course I did. What kind of mech doesn't have laser eyes? Dodging the criss-crossing beams of death and getting Vietnam-style flashbacks of Kizaru in the process, Izuku slingshotting himself forward. He threw a punch straight through the mech's glass viewing port and grabbed Mei by her shirt. Taking care to avoid the jagged shards of glass, Izuku dragged her out and held her out over the side of the arena. Do you yield? Izuku asked. Mei crossed her arms. I thought I asked you not to break my baby. You used rubber artillery rounds on me. My bruises have bruises. I think I got a bullet up my nose, and you have laser eyes. You're lucky I didn't whip out gear second. Mei huffed. Fine, you win. But you better help me make the next one. Mei dusted herself off, turned her mech to slag with a quick flash of fire from a flame dial, and walked off before Midnight, or the UA announcers could say a word. Midnight shook soot off her costume, combed a rubber bullet out of her hair, and shouted, Izuku Midoriya wins the first match. Shocked out of their stupor, the announcer said, Okay, I have to be honest, that was awesome. Let's hope the rest of the tournament can match that. The next round proved a disappointment for all involved. Shinso heckled Ojiro, saying he only got in because Izuku took pity on him. And when Ojiro shouted the same went for him, Shinso ordered him out. The crowd gasped at Todoroki's sudden iceberg, but even that spectacle paled before the giant robot fight. The other fights would have drawn attention on any other year, but a giant mech and an iceberg proved tough acts to follow. The crowd got another splash of excitement when Todoroki entombed Izuku in an even bigger iceberg. The announcers had a glimmer of hope, proclaiming the tyrant's fall before the iceberg cracked in half. He made the ice quake with swings of his fist that would have made Whitebeard proud. By the time Izuku smashed his way across the reforged arena, Todoroki was shivering, blue-lipped, and ready to pass out. Uda got clotheslined before his engines fired up. Bakugo, ready for a glorious battle for first place, got off a single explosion before he had his legs swept out from under him. His hands twisted so his palms pressed against his own back, and Izuku's knee pinning him to the arena floor. As Izuku stood atop the podium and accepted the gold medal from All Might, the cheap, flimsy award felt hollow in his hands. Aside from his fight with Mei, he never broke a sweat, and he crushed everyone else that came against him. None of his classmates ever stood a chance. So, waving with a smile plastered on his face to the board and half-hearted applause of the audience, Izuku turned his attention higher, to the heroes perched in the upper seats. He got nods of respect from Best Jeanist and Edshot, speculative gazes from Ryukyu, Gang Orca, and Endeavor. One hero, however, drew his gaze the longest. Miruku grinned down at him with a wild gaze in her eyes. As Izuku looked back, he thought she would have fit right in on the Oro Jackson. In the wake of the sports festival, the news might have focused a little less on the first-year competition than usual, and the public perception on social media was mixed at best. But between his fight with Mei being the most watched clip of the festival by a factor of 10 and the pile of internship letters that graced his desk, Izuku felt pleased with the results. Pleased, yet also uncertain, for all that his strategy of lying low worked to keep the HPSC off his back. Winning the festival with effectively both arms tied behind his back left a sour taste in his mouth. However, he felt he could do nothing about it, not without compromising his promise to be the greatest hero. Endeavor offered a terse letter claiming he'd show Izuku how to properly harness his power, to stand on equal footing with himself, and All Might atop the rankings. Izuku didn't want to be as good as them. He wanted to be better. Hawks offered him an in with the HSBC, claiming he'd make top 5 a year out of high school and number 1 the moment All Might stepped down. He didn't need Nezu's eyes to read between the lines. The HPSC wanted him to be theirs, and since the stick didn't work, they resorted to a carrot. Izuku set Hawk's letter aside. Best Jeanist offered him advice on PR management. He pointed out Izuku's social media woes and possible ways he could cultivate a better public image. Edshot offered to show him how to better exercise restraint, to rescue civilians and apprehend villains with the absolute minimum effort required. Ryukyu offered advice on how to minimize collateral damage and civilian casualties, and Gang Orca offered his insight on living and thriving with a poor public image. Any one of those would have made excellent internships. They each offered a solution to the emotional backlash Izuku had encountered when he first demonstrated the full extent of his abilities. Yet, one offer stood out from the rest. It went against everything the old Izuku would have found comfortable, but it was a siren's call for the weather-worn soul that had sailed another world's oceans. It read, "You wussed out on the rest of the rounds, but you kicked ass against that giant robot. Give my place a visit, and I'll make you break your limits." Mirko had an early violent reputation of her own. After a mixed reception of fellow heroes criticizing her professionalism, civilians finding her attitude abrasive, and citations for excessive force, Mirko doubled down on her lone wolf persona and relentlessly hunted villains. Soon, her snark and brunt attitude became its own brand, and her success rate propelled her up the rankings. Her letter made Izuku realize he had been balancing fitting himself into the tight little box society wanted him in and his personal freedom. After weeks of holding back at school, and after a single taste of almost going all out, Izuku realized he couldn't make any other choice. When he followed the provided address, he first wondered if he had somehow messed it up. The building before him might have been a gym once. It was a spacious, squat, brick-walled cube with the automatic doors boarded over with plywood, and an extra door shoved into the edifice as an afterthought. The windows were all higher up, wide flat panes of glass designed to diffuse the light passing through them. A bald patch and rusted metal brackets on the wall suggested there once was a massive neon sign perched over the door. Feeling foolish, Izuku walked up to the plywood door and knocked. Before his knuckles could rap against the wood a second time, he felt a massive spike of danger. Izuku ducked aside, and the entire door disintegrated in a shower of splinters. From the single shoe jutting from the ruined doorway, a white and gold facsimile of a rabbit's foot, Izuku knew who had tried kicking him. He was still trying to work out why when Mirko whirled and punted him straight through a brick wall. Izuku groaned and dusted himself off. A quick glance around showed rows of decrepit treadmills, racks of dumbbells tarnished with layers of dust and grime, gym mats sodden and moldy from a leaky roof, and a pile of construction supplies haphazardly shoved off to one side. In one corner, an old, but serviceable couch and a television set stood in stark contrast to the abandoned aesthetic, as though someone had hollowed out a hangout amidst the corpse of the gymnasium. A flickering shadow made him bolt away. Mirko's foot slammed into the floor with an earth-shaking boom. Izuku flung a lightning bolt, and to his shock, Mirko contemptuously batted it aside. "Come on, that all you got?" she bellowed. "Fight me." The challenge clicked in Izuku's head. As Mirko's foot whipped towards him, he braced himself and let it land. The kick rattled his bones, and he felt himself slide back half a foot. His own leg flashed up. His kicking range stretched by his devil fruit into a luminous arc. Mirko grunted, hopped back, and rubbed her shoulder. "Not bad, kid. But nobody outkicks the rabbit hero." Slipping into his pirate banter, Izuku shot back. "I dunno. I met this cook once that might give you a run for your money." "Oh really? Could that cook of yours do this?" Mirko bounced. No other word could properly encapsulate the way her body blurred into a white flash as she bounded to the roof, darted around the rafters, then shot towards the floor like a rocket hard enough to rattle the windows. Luna fall. Izuku didn't dare block that time. He soared across the room and nearly stumbled when the entire floor rippled like an ocean wave. He flung more electricity, which Mirko blocked, but he used the sparks as cover for his own attack. Thunder pistol. The air cracked like a gunshot. Izuku felt his punch land home, but when the sparks settled, he saw Mirko's foot blocking his fist. He backflipped and felt Mirko's other leg swipe through his hair. On her hands, Mirko pivoted and swung her legs in a sickle. Recognizing that move from Sanji's repertoire, Izuku knew ducking was a fast way to get his head embedded into the floor. Instead, he darted to the ceiling and raced along the rafters. Thunderbolts formed in his hands, but in that split second he had leapt out of the way. He had lost sight of Mirko. Haki warned him of an attack from behind. Izuku melted into the metal rafter and zipped away as Mirko's foot crashed through the support beam. He emerged halfway across the roof and threw lightning at her. But Mirko's hand darted up to block the attack. As Izuku sprinted away from the kicking equivalent of an orbital bombardment, his thoughts flickered through all the times Mirko had blocked his lightning. The mechanism was obvious to him. Her hands were insulated. The question was how she could react quickly enough to block. Did she have haki of her own, or was there some other way she could tell where Izuku's attacks would land? On a hunch, he threw and willed the lightning to curve. Mirko's hand rose to swat it, but the electricity dipped below her guard and zapped her in the abdomen. Izuku surged forward, only to immediately backpedal. If he hadn't stopped, Mirko's heel would have made inventing interdimensional travel from scratch, so he could steal milk from the Marines an easier fix for his dental woes than anything quirks or science could offer. "Neat trick," Mirko said. "But I've had worse reaching for a door handle." "Come on, Sparky. This is barely even a warm-up." Izuku landed back on the ground. As he darted around exercise equipment, he had hoped the professional hero would have a harder time working around clutter than someone who could turn incorporeal at will. Yet, like Izuku, Mirko sprinted straight through the equipment. Unlike Izuku, Mirko left a trail of shattered treadmills, upended benches, and bent barbells in her wake. As the gap between them closed, Izuku overturned a rack of exercise balls. Instead of slowing her down, Mirko used them as ammunition. Izuku yelped as a rubber ball shot past his cheek like a cannonball and embedded itself in the far wall. Mirko's next shot went wide to the left. Izuku barely had time to wonder why before a line drive forced him to jump, only for that first ball to ricochet and catch his ankle. A third ball careened towards him like a heat-seeking missile, and every time he dodged, another projectile wasn't far behind. Panting with exertion, Izuku decided he couldn't play chicken forever. He threw his own projectile to break Mirko's line of sight, darted from ball to bouncing ball, and came around behind Mirko. Charging across the decrepit gym, Izuku coated his hand with haki and punched at her. Mirko's ear twitched. She whirled, legs sailing in a graceful arc towards his head. Izuku flung his punch upwards, slamming her thigh with enough force to send her kick wheeling high overhead. Mirko used the extra upwards momentum to leap, then scythe her foot down. The blow clipped Izuku's shoulder, and he winced as he rolled to his feet. Lunar Rush. Izuku had to fold his body like an origami crane to avoid the barrage of kicks lashing out at him. When she switched legs, Izuku braced himself and tanked a blow, then closed in with a barrage of his own. Mirko ducked and bobbed around his punches, letting her legs do most of the work for her, until Izuku overstepped by just a fraction. She planted a kick in his shin to throw him further off balance. Izuku flipped onto his hands and used Mirko's own move against her, slamming a foot into her jaw. Rubbing her jaw, Mirko said, "Hey, that's stealing, you pipsqueak. That's not one of your copyrighted hero moves, Mirko. It's fair game." "Well, if you're going to copy me, then I should return the favor." Izuku ducked under her next kick, only to get a fist planted in his face. Stumbling back, Izuku hopped over a low sweep and kept hopping when Mirko scythed her legs higher. Mirko watched attentively as Izuku hopped on air solely off the strength of his legs. "Damn. Wish I could do that. Want to learn how? I bet you have just enough strength in your legs for it." Mirko scoffed. "Watch it, brat. I'm the one that's supposed to be teaching you here. I'll start learning the moment you show me something I don't already know." "That's it. You asked for it." Mirko couldn't hop on air, but she made a passable impression by bouncing off the walls. The whole building rattled as Mirko zipped across the room. Izuku ducked, twirled, and even split himself apart a few times as Mirko sped up into a tan and purple blur. As fast as the pro hero moved, Izuku stayed a step ahead of her. His punch forced her to twist in midair, making her land awkwardly on the far wall. Izuku followed it up with lightning, forcing her to hop away from him. Now Izuku went on the hunt, hurling spears while Mirko rabbited out of the line of fire. He tried leading the shot, and even curving his throws, but Mirko dodged every throw with uncanny instincts. Izuku could have almost mistaken it for haki. Without warning, Mirko shot towards a rafter in the center of the room. Izuku threw, and Mirko used the rafter like a gymnast's pole, swinging up and around the bolt, then hurtled towards Izuku like a meteor. Izuku slammed into the ground and plowed through several broken treadmills. He felt Mirko descending towards him, and leapt away just as she came crashing down. Rising from the strewn wreckage like a fallen angel of war, Mirko rolled her neck until it popped and cracked her knuckles. "Hey, kid. When are you going to stop holding back on me?" Izuku flinched. I can't. I mean, you're one of the best pros in the country, but I don't know if you can take it. I've sparred with All Might. Do you really think you're stronger than the number one? Or am I going to have to punch you through half the city before you quit treating me with the kitty gloves?" I've killed people by accident before, Izuku admitted. I don't want to kill you. Mirko snorted. Kid, I've done the same. Kicked a man in the ribs so hard he pissed out his kidneys. Holding back is great and all. Don't want to get blood splatters all over that bright, shiny hero image Japan loves wanking off to. But in this line of work, lives are on the line. You need to go all out, and hesitating for even a split second can cost someone their life. The more practice you have with it, the easier it'll be. Izuku sighed. All right, I hope you're ready. Izuku didn't use Soro this time. He flew like lightning, flickering forward in a flash of sparks directly into Mirko's guard. The hero moved like molasses to his eyes, legs tensing, body flexing, preparing to absorb the blow she knew she had no hope of dodging. His fist rammed into her gut. She folded like a lawn chair and slammed through a wall. Izuku winced, ran to the hole, and looked outside for her. The light pole across the street was bent oddly, but no sign of her remained. Izuku heard a window shatter. Mirko planted her feet on the window's edge and kicked hard enough to rip the building apart. She slammed into him with a concussive thump that rocked the building's foundations and planted Izuku firmly in the concrete beneath the wooden floors. Grunting, Izuku pulled himself free and dusted himself off while keeping a wary eye on Mirko. Seeing that he still had some fight left in him, Mirko held up a hand. I think that's enough for today. Don't want to get yelled at for bringing the whole block down. Izuku nodded and joined Mirko on the ragged couch that remained virtually untouched amidst the strewn wreckage of the gym. Mirko took a long swig from a water bottle and said, Be straight with me, kid. You were still holding back, weren't you? Guiltily, Izuku nodded. Mirko snorted and said, Don't blame you. Heard making that giant fist laid you up for half a day. We'll work on that. Maybe start smaller and practice more. Izuku nodded eagerly and said, I had another idea I wanted to work on too. I've been trying to absorb ambient electricity and boost myself with it. But I have a hard time holding onto the extra power. Mirko grinned. Sounds like fun. I'll see if I can drag a power generator in here. We could also mooch off the power grid. But something tells me the HPSC would have a few words with me if we caused a blackout. Izuku's mood soured at the mention of the HPSC, but he shook it off. Instead, he asked, You really think I should get stronger? Of course. Wouldn't be much fun if you didn't, right? Izuku took a deep breath. He could almost taste the salt, feel the weathered wood beneath his feet, and a sea breeze rushing past his face. It was as though he had forgotten how to breathe, and suddenly came back up for air. For weeks, he had bottled himself up, holding back all but the tiniest fraction of his strength, even as he felt rivers of power coursing all across the city, begging him to let loose and drink deeply of them. He had wondered if he was alone in his strength, marooned on an entire universe that would shatter at the lightest touch. Even the Namu, for all its monstrous strength, couldn't withstand his full might. But Mirko, he might not have gone gear second. But that punch he threw had everything he could pack into it, and she still came back to kick his ass. His classmates were afraid of him, even the ones that tried to hide it, and the teachers all watched him like hawks. Even Nesu, for all that his unflinching gaze gave no hint of unease, cautioned him against displaying his power. Mirko took one look at what he could accomplish and wanted to see if he could do more. So, when do we get started? Tomorrow, brat. I need a shower, and you need to run back home before your bedtime. I got a patrol over in another city. Something about the asshole running around killing heroes. And once we bag him, we'll work on that kick of yours. Mirko smirked and slammed her foot on the ground. No student of mine's becoming a hero without learning how to kick through a brick wall. Sparks jumped from his clenched fingers, and his face lit up in a feral grin as he walked home. Hawks landed in front of the gaping hole in the gym's wall. One look inside told him everything he needed to know. Scorch marks littered the walls, splintered scraps of plastic and metal lay scattered across the floor, and the air still carried the faint scent of ozone and burnt rubber. Scattering his feathers about, Hawks felt for any sign of Midoriya and found none. Still watching for trouble, Hawks tiptoed over the wreckage and approached the ratty couch. Mirko sat on a pile of cushions, one leg stretched out over a case of beers, eating a bowl of orange mush while an old martial arts flick played. "I thought I told you to knock," Mirko said. Hawks sat and helped himself to a warm beer. "You left the door wide open. I figured you were inviting me in." "Bullshit. I made sure that Mirko craned her neck and saw the hole in the wall. "Very funny, Chicken Little. Didn't you have your own brat to drag around?" "Not my fault the little birdie couldn't keep up with me." Mirko snorted. "Like anyone's supposed to keep up with you when you break the sound barrier." Getting ditched builds character. Just look at how I turned out. Not sure you're the best role model, Mr. Government Stooge. Some of us actually understand what teamwork is, Miss Lone Rabbit. For a moment, they sat in silence and watched the movie. Hawks rolled his eyes at the clumsy, over-the-top wire foo, with actors flailing around in the air like badly designed puppets. Mirko snorted when one finally landed a glancing blow and spooned more orange mash into her mouth. Hawks looked closer at the jar's label. "Are you eating baby food?" "It's cheaper than buying a blender," Mirko said. "Tastes like crap." She scraped out the bottom of the jar and cracked open a second one. "If your fights with that Midoriya kid keep ending up like this, that blender might be a good investment." Mirko muted the movie. "You know I hate all that HPSC politics bullshit. It might have come up once or twice." Mirko slapped him with the spoon. Hawks scrubbed it off his shirt and winced at the orange stain it left. "Consider it a mark of how batshit crazy I think they've gone when I say that the stunt they pulled with the festival was a load of crap. Yeah, not one of their finer moments. The guy who suggested pitting him against Hatsune got fired. Oh great, it's even worse than I imagined. They fixed the randomized fights. They're always randomized. Or do you really think the rat would leave something so important to chance? The HPSC simply decided they wanted a turn at the wheel this year. Yeah, because they felt like murdering that kid's career in the cradle. The kid's dangerous." Mirko kicked down. Beer cans went skittering across the floor, and the table shattered with a loud crash. "I'm dangerous. You're dangerous. That sweet old lady who asked me for baby pictures at the checkout aisle could twist people into a pretzel with her mind for all I know. News flash, Chicken Little, we're all fucking dangerous. If the HPSC's gonna freak out over everyone who could possibly be dangerous, then they don't have any business running this country. Midoriya's a bit more dangerous than some old granny, Mirko. And worse, Nizu's making the HPSC antsy with how he's been hiding it. He already has more power than he should, and less oversight. Probably he knows goddamn well the HPSC would either throw Izuku in Tartarus or give him a job. Hard to say which would be worse. Look, I'm not happy with this either. But either I give them the information they want, or they'll have to resort to other methods. They don't have to do anything. In fact, if they could stop doing anything and mind their own fucking business, that would be great." Hawks gave her a flat look. "Roomy." Mirko gave him an ugly glare, but Hawks refused to look away. He needed her to realize how serious the situation was, especially since any of the HPSC's more drastic methods would most likely happen under her watch. Last thing they needed was a top 10 hero pulling a Nagant. Whatever Mirko read on her face made her shake her head. "That bad, huh? All right, you win. Just realize I had to push the kid into doing this much." Before Hawks could ask what she meant, she rolled up her shirt. Her entire abdomen was a giant purple bruise, with a fist printed in burnt skin right above her left kidney. "Mirko, You need a hospital. Relax. I've had worse stubbing my toe. Nothing's broken, and I'm not pissing blood. You realize that does nothing to calm me down, right? I know. And this was after I tried to block it with my leg. She rolled back her tights, exposing more bruised skin all along her knee. That made a chill run down Hawk's spine. She had deflected the equivalent of an artillery shell with her leg. Midoriya doing that kind of damage put him near All Might's level. Or maybe even on it. Mirko. I need to hear you tell me right now that you're planning to teach the kid to put a tight leash on his strength. Kid's already got that. There'd be a lot of dead kids at that school if he didn't. Then at least tell me you're just showing him boring hero stuff. Patrol routes, paperwork, news cameras, the old smile and wave routine. Mirko looked away from him. Yeah, sure, whatever. Not like the kid needs to get stronger. Which meant she was absolutely going to make him stronger. Hawks felt a migraine brewing behind his eyes. I'll take your word for it. Mirko nodded and turned the volume back on. As the cheesy post-fight dialogue warbled out of antiquated speakers, Hawks said, Mind passing me a jar? Mirko raised an eyebrow at him, cracked one open with her toes, and flung it at him. Hawks caught it with a feather and sniffed. Dipping a finger into it, he licked, shrugged, and dumped the rest into his mouth. You should get a blender. You could even add things besides carrots to it. Never. Apples, oranges, mangoes. Blasphemy. You realize carrots are unhealthy for rabbits, right? Do I look like a rabbit to you? Yes. Mirko flung an empty jar at him. So says the plucked chicken. I bet some Greek philosopher used you to make a point. Behold, a man. And here, I thought you were fast asleep during history class. Greek philosophy? Try the internet sometime. Might help you break out of that HPSC echo chamber you've been incubating inside. Maybe when I'm not busy keeping this country afloat. Bailing water don't mean shit if nobody's patching the holes. It does if it gets you to a safe harbor. Hawks rose and stretched his wings. Watch your back in Hasu. The hero killer's been taking on stronger and stronger heroes. No one's really sure how strong he is, or how he's doing it. He wouldn't be hiding if he was any good. Hawks thought about repeating himself, to emphasize keeping an eye out, but decided against it. She had enough warning about the HPSC. Once he was outside and well out of Mirko's earshot, he called up his boss and said, It's worse than you thought, sir. And frankly, I don't think we can do anything about it. The answer he got wasn't the one he had hoped for. And you have no idea how important salt is for your sense of taste until you spend 2 weeks being unable to taste it. Cheeses and cured meats taste awful. Butter tastes like it's unsalted. And even sprinkling salt straight on your tongue feels like you might have caught a whiff of an ocean breeze. About the only things that tasted right were fruits and raw vegetables. Such is the magic of prescription mouthwash. Would have been nice hearing about that caveat up front. But I guess me complaining about my broken sense of taste is how they know I actually used the stuff. Went 2 years without visiting a dentist because the one I went to closed its doors without me noticing. And that was the price I paid. No cavities though. Reviews are always appreciated. I'd like to know what you think of the fight scene, Mirko and Hawk's character and interplay, and anything else that comes to mind. Feedback is how I improve as a writer. Vincenz. Damn, this was a fast-paced chapter. Who were you racing when writing this up? Fucking Speed Racer. Bardothren. So many fanfics have done the sports festival to death that I felt no need to waste time with it, especially since it's meaningless for Izuku. Brushing through it quickly is rather the point. Projectisman. Yeah, they goofed putting Izuku and Mei in the first round lol. Bardothren. In their defense, it probably seemed like the perfect way to vilify Izuku. Not their fault Mei hid a mecha in her purse. Adds the great 332. Great chapter, Though you did have a typo after Dark Shadow stole a headband as Izuku gives the headband back to Minta, not Shinso. Izuku met the quirk's eyes as he passed the million-point headband back to Minta *, and he winked. Bardothren. There are no typos in Ba Sing Se. Yeah, that was due to Minta eventually getting the 4th slot in the first draft. And I felt unhappy with how it went. Not perfectly happy with how Shinso fit in either. But I couldn't think of any better ideas. Caspian 123. But alas, this is your story. I guess we will have to wait for the Marines and the pirates to reach Izuku for him to get a good fight. Bardothren. If this chapter didn't prove you wrong, the next one might. Naruto 30. Why is the world against Izuku here? Granted, he's a pirate in another world, and the HPSC is a load of dung. But still, it's sad to see his classmates not liking him. Also, did Shoto not get therapy here due to Izuku being up? And it's kinda good that the pros at least like him. And isn't the announcer booth used by Mike and Aizawa? Why is some random nobody manning it here? Waiting for your next update. Don't slow down on me now, Sparks, Mirko called out while she hopped backwards. We're almost there. Izuku gritted his teeth. Running from Musatafu to Hasu was longer than anything he had done before, given most islands in the other world were half that size. But that was nothing to his stamina. But running the whole way while carrying a generator, and simultaneously trying to hold in the power it generated, made Izuku feel nauseous across his entire body. All that extra electricity wanted out, and whenever it built up enough, it lashed out in vibrant arcs around his feet. When they finally crossed the city limits, Mirko leaned up against a building and said, "That's good. Make sure you don't break it setting it down. You'll be doing the same thing on the way back." Izuku groaned and set the generator down inside some bushes. Stretching out his fatigued limbs and shaking off sparks in the process, Izuku asked, "So, how does patrolling work?" For the day-to-day, most heroes have an assigned route that they change frequently so nobody gets too familiar with our patterns. I can't be bothered with that, because they refuse to plot a route that really lets me stretch my legs. And for a situation like this one, Mirko held up a sheet of paper. Overlapping patrol routes, circling around the city and identifying any possible hiding spots and ambushes. Mirko ripped hers up. Definitely not sticking to that. Why not? No one knows how this Stain guy gets away with so much. It's possible he has an inside man feeding him information on people's quirks and patrol routes. So, if we're not going to do that, then what's our plan? Mirko shrugged. Hop around, get you some Parker training, and run towards anything suspicious that we see or hear. Off in the distance, a loud explosion and people screaming dimly sounded from inside the city. Like that? Izuku asked. Mirko was already gone. Cursing under his breath, Izuku zipped forward. He arrived just in time to see Mirko plunge from the sky like a spear and flatten a Namu into the street. When it twitched and started rising, Mirko caved its head in for good measure. This thing gave you trouble at the USG. I barely worked up a sweat. I think this one's different. Izuku poked it in the shoulder. The one I fought had a regeneration quirk. How good was it? It regrew its entire upper torso in under a minute. Mirko gave a low whistle. Guess that means there's more of these things. On cue, 8 portals sprang up in a ring around them. The crowd snapping pictures quickly evaporated, leaving only a few foolhardy civilians willing to risk their lives for a glimpse of some real action. A few had the same black-skinned bodies, but most were composed of different materials. A wooden Namu looked straight from a Tolkien novel. One had a nearly transparent glass body with a pulsing ruby heart, and a third looked like Frankenstein's take on a rubber duck, complete with yellow rubbery skin, an orange duck bill, and beady black eyes. The Namu attacked in sync with each other. The glass Namu opened its chest, and a barrage of glass splinters fire out like a shotgun blast. The wooden monster made a cage with growing branches, and the rubber Namu charged at him, making rubber chicken squeaking noises with each step. Izuku ducked behind the rubber Namu, letting it take a shower of glass to the back, then used its shoulders as a springboard to vault towards the rapidly closing hole in the wooden dome. Once he's free, Izuku slams on top of the glass Namu and shatters it like a vase. The ruby crystal pulsed. The glass shards melted and ran in tiny rivers towards it. Izuku pounced at the obvious weakness, but the wooden Namu flung an entire tree trunk at him, forcing Izuku to jump out of reach as the glass monster reformed itself. Izuku flung lightning at both Namu. The glass one came away unscathed, with sparks rippling across its surface like a plasma globe. But the wooden one sported scorch marks where Izuku hit it. Izuku formed a spear in his hands and folded it in on itself, tempering it like a blade until it shone painfully bright. As he dodged around glass splinters and grasping branches, Izuku darted above the wooden Namu and hurled the spear directly onto its head. Its entire body lit up like a pitch-soaked torch, burning with palpable heat even as it continued reaching for him. Flecks of blackened bark peeled away from its body, and clouds of white ash puffed out with each breath it took. The glass Namu aimed both arms at Izuku. Its limbs exploded in a volley of glass knives, perforating the air around him. Given no time to dodge, Izuku braced himself and weathered the storm. Haki protected his vitals, but his arms and legs took numerous shallow cuts. The few glass shards that bit deep enough into his toughened muscles to stick there fell out the moment Izuku flexed his body. As its chest opened up, Izuku kicked the ground, flipped a chunk of concrete up with his foot, and hurled it forward. The Namu screeched like a scratched chalkboard as a crack shot up the side of the beating crystal. Izuku darted forward, coated his fist in haki, and punched straight through its body. The color bled out of the crimson crystal, and the Namu shattered into a blinding cloud of glass dust. Hearing little toots puffing from behind him, Izuku ducked, turned, and planted his fist deep into the rubber Namu's belly. It let out a long, rubbery shriek, yet despite how much its chest caved inwards, neither its feet nor its head moved an inch. Then its body rubber banded back into place, flinging Izuku's arm behind his back. The Namu swiped at him, and Izuku leapt backwards. He flung more electricity, but the Namu seemed unfazed by the electricity, leaving molten lines across its body. Izuku cracked his knuckles. "You're out of luck, you ugly duckling. Luffy's way better with his rubber quirk than you'll ever be." Izuku threw punch after punch. Sharp smacks of fist meeting rubber, punctuated by shrill squeaks from the Namu's rubber beak, drowned out the background din of smashed windows and people screaming. Izuku fell into a rhythm, throwing brutal haymakers and dipping aside before the Namu could hit him. Each squeak felt viscerally satisfying, like popping bubble wrap, and Izuku started smiling despite himself. "Hey, this is actually pretty fun. Mirko, why don't you try giving this a..." A rubber fist embedded itself in Izuku's face. Luckily for Izuku, he had plenty of practice dealing with rubber fists to the face. Izuku snarled. "That's it. Playtime's over." He grabbed the Namu's wrist, jeppoed into the air, and with a mighty yell, flung the Namu into the ground. The Namu flattened and let out a deafening squeak. When it bounced back up, it disappeared into the clouds. "Huh. I'll have to remember that trick with Luffy." "If you're done sightseeing," Mirko huffed while she sidestepped a Namu's punch, "mind taking one of these off my hands?" She swept one off its feet with a low, sweeping kick, and Izuku pounced on the opportunity. He buried it in the street with a punch to the face and fried it for good measure. Once he made sure it wouldn't break out, he found Mirko kicking the last Namu into a bloody pulp. Mirko grimaced at the mess the Namu made on her costume. "Great, I just got this one last week." She wiped as much off on a fallen Namu as she could manage and turned to survey the others. "Wood, glass, and rubber, all dropped on our heads the moment we take out a Namu." Those are some oddly specific choices of monster design. Izuku nodded. What should I do? If I had to guess, they're testing your quirk. The smart thing to do would be to keep your head down and try not to show off too much. Izuku looked around. A lot of the fighting happened in open areas, on wide streets, and at intersections. Narrow, dimly lit alleyways crisscrossed the city. Should we split up? Izuku asked. I can slip through the alleyways and avoid them. If you're fighting somewhere in the open, they'll think I'm nearby. Nezu and the HPSC would both kill me if I let you go unsupervised. With a wink, she said, That's why it'll be our little secret. Sharing a smile with her, Izuku raced off into the nearest alleyway. He slunk through shadows and crept through open windows, using everything he learned avoiding Marines and unfriendly pirates to infiltrate his way deeper in the city. Wherever he heard nearby signs of fighting, he found people huddling in closets and hiding under beds, and he guided them towards safer areas. A few times, a shadow sprang up in his path and spewed out a Namu. The first few he simply ran away from, but the third had a magnetism quirk that latched onto Izuku's body. As it reeled Izuku in test, Izuku used the momentum to drive a haki-coated punch through its face. Unnerved by how well the Namu's quirk worked on him, Izuku racked his head for a way to dodge the Namu. He couldn't tell where they were watching him from, so he had to find a way to slip their notice. A metal fire escape gave him an idea. Sinking into the metal, Izuku rode the conductive material to the rooftop. He had hoped to find another source of metal, but the only thing connecting the building to other areas were the power cables brimming with electricity. Deciding to test it out, Izuku forced his way through the insulator and settled into the cable. He felt himself diffuse throughout the city's power grid, giving himself a vague sense of the entire city attached to it, before picking out a discreet spot on the other side of town. He slipped out quietly, and the Namu stopped dropping in on him. It was when he was in the middle of trying to find the next person to help and following the scent of blood, when he happened upon a startling Tableau Pro Hero native, still as a corpse, but not quite gone if the steady trickle of blood from his wounds is anything to go by. Ida, fallen, glaring up the length of a dull, chipped, blood-soaked blade at its wielder. A haggard man swathed in bandages, missing his nose, and staring contemptuously with bloodshot eyes at the child as he raised his sword high to impale him. Izuku moved. Ida's eyes twitched towards him, widening in surprise, and it was enough warning to make Stain whirl and raise his blade. Izuku punched it aside, and Stain's left hand darted out with a knife. Izuku let the blade pass through him and used the opening to punch Stain in the jaw. The punch connected with a meaty slap that could have passed for a gunshot, but Stain simply bent back, letting the force of Izuku's punch dissipate across his body, then swung his sword back up. Izuku barely caught the black glint running along the blade. Given no time to dodge, Izuku augmented his own chest and took the haki-coated blade across his ribs. The blow knocked the wind out of him, but only his shirt was cut. Stain backed away and lowered his blade, but his stance remained firm, ready to defend at a moment's notice. You have a strong will. I thought no one else had the strength of mind in this rotten society to ascend beyond their limits. There are plenty if you know where to look. You had a tutor, then. His eyes flicked over his outfit. You must be a hero student. With a will like yours, killing you would be a waste. My only interest is in these two fakes. Leave them. They are not worthy to call themselves your peers. I wouldn't be much of a hero if I let you kill them. Fair enough. I'll try not to injure you too badly. Stain's arm whipped out. 6 gleaming knives shot towards Izuku. Weaving through them, Izuku darted past Stain's sword and hammered his gut. He felt haki block the blow and nearly lost his arm to Stain's upward swipe. Punches against swords, knives against flying sparks, Izuku and Stain traded blows. In strength, they were evenly matched, but Izuku could tell that he had an edge on speed. Testing that theory, Izuku soared across the alley, racing faster than Stain's eyes could track and aiming a punch at his kidneys. Stain's haki sprang up at the last second, but Izuku blurred away before he could bring his sword around. In response to Izuku's speed, Stain started throwing knives at his two injured victims. Having to deflect a seemingly endless supply of knives out of the air kept Izuku from applying enough pressure to overwhelm Stain. As the fight progressed, Izuku analyzed the situation. He needed to get Native and Ida out of harm's way, but if he tried to collect one, Stain would kill the other. He could try calling someone else, but the only person he could reach who could hold their own against Stain was Mirko, and if she joined back up with him, the Namu might appear again. Time was running out. Neither Native nor Ida showed any signs of getting up. He had no way of calling anyone he could trust against Stain without adding Namu into the mix. Whatever he did, he needed it fast, and now. The alley was bereft of cables, but Izuku could feel the power lines crossing the streets all around him. He reached out, but instead of pulling himself along for the ride, he made the current come to him. Electricity burst out of their insulative casings and shoved their way inside Izuku. He felt as though he were a water balloon, filled to the point where the plastic was nearly colorless from being stretched so thin and fit to burst at the lightest touch. Stain didn't remain idle. In the fraction of a second it took for the lightning to make Izuku balloon outward, he drew a brace of knives and threw them, some at Ida, some at Native, and some at Izuku himself. Those knives made Izuku focus. He shoved all that power into a tight, dense ball and lashed out. Lightning struck each knife from the air. Flexing his arms, Izuku felt the dense electricity ebb into his limbs like molten glass. Sparks leapt from his back and gouged chunks out of the nearby masonry. Clenching his hands and jaws, Izuku used Tekai Haki, everything he could think of to force the electricity to stay inside. An ebony shell crept from his fists to shoulders, while green sparks arched around his back and chest, writhing like snakes trying to escape Izuku's grasp. Gear third, Izuku rasped, rumble gattling. Caught beneath the barrage of fists, Stain didn't have any time to throw knives. His arms and legs moved as though he were wading through mud, and his eyes couldn't even track the afterimages of Izuku's movements. Yet, as his sword blocked a fist, it was already moving to intercept the next three attacks. Patches of haki hardened the instant Izuku's fist broke through his sword's guard, and vanished the moment Izuku drew away. No matter how much Izuku sped up, no matter how thoroughly he outsped Stain, no matter how much ground the serial killer lost against the raw power of Izuku's punches pushing against him, Stain kept up through an uncanny ability to read exactly where the punches would land the instant Izuku decided to throw them. Izuku felt his strength waning, felt the dense coils of electricity slipping from his grasp. Gear second would leave him and the victims wide open. He didn't dare pull in more electricity, not with how unstable he already felt. He had hit his limit. Now he had to break it. As he threw even more punches, he shouted between gasps for air, "I won't let you hurt anyone." With each word, his punches moved even faster. His fists blurred into a visual anomaly, flickering so quickly that the human eye thought they were moving backwards. The image stilled, then trickled forwards before blurring out of the human eye's ability to perceive. At first, Stain kept up. The sword wove a looping dance through the air, acquiring more chips as Izuku hammered away at it. More and more punches slipped through. As the haki had to shuffle around faster and faster, it gradually started lingering, passively guarding vital areas while haki flickered elsewhere. Those patches grew, and Stain stopped blocking blows to his arms and legs. Eventually, the haki snapped, like spider silk stretched too far. But even as blood dribbled from Stain's lips, he remained firmly on his feet. Even as Izuku's punches continued to ravage his body, Stain screamed, loud enough to echo over the static hiss of Izuku's blindingly fast arms. "Why are you smiling?" Sensing a lull in the fight, Izuku slowed down his punches. He felt simultaneously ready to fly apart and fall over from a stiff breeze. But he took a deep breath and forced his body to hold itself together for a little longer. All Might smiles, doesn't he? Stain sneered. His smile is for the people he's protecting. You're smiling because you enjoy this. For all your strength, you're a fake like the rest of them. In it for your own satisfaction. Izuku raised a finger to his lips. His grin never wavered. Huh. Guess it's because you're someone I can fully cut loose against. I couldn't even go all out against Mirko. She's trying to hide it. But I can tell she's still recovering from that punch I hit her with. So what? You just want free license to use your power however you want. A hero without restraint is just a rabid dog on a leash. Endeavor, Rukyu, Gang Orca. They're all glorified for crushing lesser men beneath their feet. That's not the kind of hero this world needs. Izuku felt his vision blurring. Breathing evenly, Izuku fought back the urge to vomit and tried to find a way to end the fight. I don't care what you think. I'll do it anyway. Izuku drew himself up, trying to continue the conversation while he funneled more power into his arm. Stain would likely cut him, but an arm was a small price to pay for saving Ida and Native. I will become the next #1 hero, and I will save as many people as I can. Stain spat blood. You're not worthy of his mantle. Neither are you. Izuku's arm ballooned in size. It filled the entire narrow alleyway, and Izuku had to lean carefully to keep it from crushing the wounded heroes. It leaked electricity like a sieve, but Izuku kept pushing more in as he planted his feet for a punch. Gear second, Thor's. Conqueror's haki slammed into Izuku like a sledgehammer. His concentration slipped, and the skin of his arm burst apart as the power rushed out of it. Cradling his wounded arm and fighting to keep his eyes open, Izuku sank to one knee. Stain leaned on his sword like a cane. Heaving breaths as he glared down at Izuku, he said, "This is the full extent of my resolve. My quirk once required the target's blood, but now I can bring anyone to their knees at will. I won't let anyone stop me from culling this world of fake heroes. Now fall, and may your death pave the way for a brighter future." Drained as he was, Izuku refused to fall. Conqueror's will weighed heavily on his fatigued shoulders, but he had felt worse from a cabin boy. Clenching his fingers, Izuku lumbered to his feet. Stain stared in shock as Izuku met his gaze. "I made a promise," Izuku said, voice hoarse, "that I would be the #1 hero. And I'm not going to let a madman like you stop me. I won't let you hurt Ida, or Native, or anyone else, you hear me?" Stain cackled. "Too late for that, child. Take a good look." Reluctant to take his eyes off the hero killer, Izuku slowly turned his head. Native and Ida were both barely awake, clinging to consciousness solely through the distance Izuku had pummeled between them and Stain. Izuku felt his stomach sink. It wouldn't matter whether or not he beat Stain, when passing out meant they couldn't run or call for help. He had already pushed past his limits, and he knew he had at best a minute before he'd pass out, Conqueror's will or not. "I'm impressed. Every other hero I've used this on dropped within a second." Stain let his sword drag along the pavement as he walked forward. "But that doesn't change the fact that you're a fake. No way am I letting an arrogant, power-hungry brat like you take All Might's place. Now, fall." The weight on his shoulders intensified the closer Stain drew. Izuku could feel the palpable weight of the killer's malice, his hatred and contempt, the literal thirst for blood scratching at the back of his throat. As death walked towards him, Izuku remembered the other times he faced mortal peril: Whitebeard's Naginata descending like an executioner's axe, Shiki the Golden Lion and his pirate crew, Kizaru and the Marines. He remembered his promise, shouted over the wind as a maelstrom of lightning carried him home. He remembered his friends, Roger and his crew, Luffy and the other Straw Hats, and May, with him for the entire journey and beyond. He would not fall. He would not surrender. And he would not let anyone die. Izuku felt something within him snap, like the first bolt of a thunderstorm. Stain's haki faltered as Izuku shoved it away with his own will. I will not. Izuku dimly recognized that the crackling veil encircling him was his own conqueror's haki. He wrangled with the unfamiliar sensation, trying to focus it in one direction. But his newfound power bucked like a wild stallion. Every attempt to exert control only resulted in the power growing, and growing, and growing. When the power finally ebbed out of him, Izuku collapsed onto his knees. A spike of terror shot through him, and he scrambled to raise his head. Stain stood over him, a crimson figure backlit in a halo from a flickering street lamp. Izuku smothered a cry of despair in his throat and tried to summon more lightning, but his body was spent, and the power coursing through the city resisted his pull. As the seconds stretched by, Izuku realized Stain wasn't moving. His eyes were rolled back, and his body swayed slightly in the wind. Izuku chuckled weakly. I did it. Ida and Native are. Izuku's mirth died away. Ida. Native. Izuku dragged his body around. Ida and Native were both on the ground, unconscious, and though there was barely half an alley between them, they may as well have been in another world for all Izuku was able to reach them. His legs refused to move, and he only made it a few feet before his arms gave out. As he lay there, Izuku heard the telltale hum of a portal opening. A Namu swooped down from the sky and grabbed him by the shirt. Izuku dimly realized that his fight with Stain had gotten the League's attention, and they had waited until the fight was over to swoop in and take him. With the last of his strength, Izuku gathered a few feeble sparks and stabbed them like a dagger into one of the Namu's eyes. It barely twitched as the organ ruptured and continued flying half-blind. As Izuku's eyes started to close, the last thing he saw was a chipped blade plummeting through the Namu's neck. When Izuku drifted back into consciousness, he kept his eyes closed and his body limp. Casting his senses out, Izuku felt the electric thrum of medical devices surrounding him. Further out, he felt an adjacent bed in the room, and more rooms throughout the hospital. He could make out individual people by the phones in their pockets, patrolling the rooms or waiting outside. Assured that he wasn't in immediate danger, Izuku looked around. Ida was in the other bed, staring blankly at the television as a news reporter gave casualty reports for the Hasu incident. When Izuku shifted, making a rustling noise with his blanket, Ida glared at him. Why do you and Stain have the same quirk? For a moment, Izuku had no idea what he was talking about. When he realized it, Izuku made a fist. A black haki shell fitfully flickered into place over his knuckles. You mean this? Yes, that. Are you related to him somehow? Having already tried explaining haki, and having it fall on deaf ears, Izuku instead said, If he is, I don't know about it. As if the conversation sapped the strength from him, Ida flopped back onto his pillow. Why did you interfere? I was going to avenge my brother. For what? When Ida refused to answer, Izuku puzzled it over. The hero killer, Ida's quirk. Feeling for his phone, Izuku tried to look it up, only to find his phone fried. The battery had burst open, and only a molten glob of its outer shell remained. Is your brother ingenium? Ida remained silent, but the rustling of his bedsheets as Ida strangled them in his hands gave Izuku all the answer he needed. Outside the room, Izuku heard a nurse say, Excuse me, sirs, but the patients are not allowed visitors at this time. Please step aside. It is a matter of national security. The nurse evidently let them through, as a moment later, the chief of police, an HPSC representative, and Hawks all entered the room. Izuku reached for power, and though his own reserves ran dry, he stealthily siphoned power from the hospital's electric grid. Most people didn't notice the subtle flicker of the lights, but Hawk's eyes darted from the ceiling to Izuku, and a few of his feathers slipped into corners of the room, like knives hidden up a sleeve. "Our apologies for intruding upon your recovery time," the dog-faced chief said. "But events surrounding the Hasu incident require immediate discussion. Both of you used your quirks against a villain in violation of your status as interns. Izuku, your mentor claims that she gave you permission, but she lacked the authority to do so." Izuku tried to keep the surprise off his face. Mirko never said anything about it, so he could only assume she was covering for him. "I only did so in the absence of other options that would save lives," he said, deliberately not lying. The chief nodded. "Ida, your mentor claims you actively disobeyed orders and ran away during an emergency. Do you have anything to say to clarify the situation?" Ida's face reddened, and he looked away. "No, sir." The representative cleared her throat. "We do not have the right to dictate whether or not you are expelled from UA. That decision ultimately rests with the school itself. However, we do have the right to file criminal charges against you for vigilantism and unlicensed quirk usage." Before Izuku could formulate a response, the representative said, "In light of the recent tragedy, however, we will overlook your indiscretions. Ida, given your family's circumstances and your own actions, we are mandating therapy sessions as a requirement for your continued internship and work studies. We will not be so forgiving of any future lapses in judgment." Visibly choked up, Ida could only nod and blink tears away. "As for you, Mr. Midoriya," the representative adjusted her glasses and gave him a wary look. "We would appreciate it if we could have a private conversation to clear the air, as it were, and come to a mutual understanding of both your situation and the HPSC's as an organization. We understand that there are certain sensitive details about your sudden spike in power that are best kept under wraps." Izuku felt his face turn ashen. Had the HPSC learned about the DeLorean? Thoughts spinning through his head, Izuku numbly nodded and allowed the representative and Hawks to lead him to a private waiting room. Hawks checked the walls and vents for bugs. With a quick nod, he went to wait outside, while the representative laid out a manila folder. "First, on behalf of the HPSC, I would like to apologize." The representative let her words hang in the air. "We have long-standing grievances against Principal Nezu, as over the past couple decades, he has leveraged the influence of his former students, most notably All Might, to expand the influence of his school beyond what it would typically have, purporting himself and his institution as the foundation of heroism. He has amassed a large following of schools and hero agencies throughout Japan, and he puts a lot of pressure on the Japanese government to lessen regulations on hero agencies, provide grants to private rescue and underground teams, and give the schools greater freedom to work directly with heroes. All of these he can claim as beneficial for Japan, but they also expand his own influence at the expense of the HPSC." Izuku drummed his fingers on the table, trying to follow along, but having no idea what point the representative was trying to make. "What does this have to do with me?" "Well," she said, "you fell out of the sky, displayed a very powerful quirk not listed on your medical records, and were taken in by the police. Within an hour, Nezu arrived personally at the station with updated quirk registry forms and whisked you out of there before our organization had the opportunity to speak with you." The representative brushed silver hair out of her eyes. "There were many within our organization who feared that Nezu planned to raise you as the next All Might, which you didn't want because it would make Yua even more powerful." Delight flickered across her eyes before she smoothly hid it. "Precisely. And well, with the state of Japan at the time and no credible threats requiring another hero of All Might's caliber, it was decided that a hero as volatile as you would be would cause the hero industry to stagnate. And that's why the news focused so much on the villain deaths at the USG and criticized Yua for a lack of security, and why you co-opted the sports festival and tried to have your own announcers worsen my reputation." Izuku watched her closely, expecting a wince or other sign of weakness. But to her credit, She remained perfectly smooth-faced as she said, "Rest assured, the individuals that had pushed for such heavy-handed methods have either been demoted or removed from the HPSC entirely. But there's nothing stopping you from doing the same thing again, is there? After the Hasu disaster, we can no longer afford to. With All Might's condition, we need a new pillar that can measure up to the threat we face. What about Endeavor or Hawks?" The representative studied him closely. "All Might never told you, did he?" Izuku forcibly kept the confusion from his face and asked, "Told me about what?" Instead of answering, she opened a folder on the table. "You have every right to know, but I'm afraid I cannot tell you more without you signing an NDA. It is a matter of national security. And what's stopping me from asking All Might about it?" The representative hesitated. With a sigh, she snapped the folder shut and tucked it away. "I suppose you'll hear about this anyways, one way or another." Clearing her throat, she said, "Since the dawn of quirks, there has been a villain with the power to take quirks and use them for himself. That villain's name is All for One." She said the name as though she expected it to mean something to Izuku. Not knowing how to respond to it, he simply waited for her to keep talking. "I'm sure you can understand how serious of a threat they posed. Any quirk used against him can be taken. Hundreds of heroes fell against him, their powers used to hunt their comrades. He stole longevity and healing quirks, gave quirks away to create loyal followers, and set himself as the king of Japan's criminal underworld. The only force that could stand against him, and eventually toppled his empire, was a quirk passed from hero to hero since his reign began. The quirk One for All." Izuku couldn't hide his surprise at that. Luckily for him, the representative mistook the reason for his shock. "You've done an admirable job hiding it up to this point. We've been watching All Might for years and never had any idea he had approached you." The representative paused, fishing for information. Izuku had none to give. Frowning slightly at his silence, she said, "I find little joy in putting the hopes of the entire nation on your shoulders. But that's more or less what you signed up for taking that quirk. My only interest in the matter is mending bridges with you, so the HPSC can properly support you in the war against All for One." "Mending bridges, how exactly?" "Considering you turned down Hawk's offer, I doubt you're amenable to working directly for us." Izuku snorted. The representative stifled a sigh and said, "In lieu of that, we will work on turning public opinion around. Sir Nightai is investigating a Yakuza group. We'll have you assigned to the task force, give the team more resources, and have the matter wrapped up before summer starts. Their leader is highly dangerous, but given your quirk, you won't have any problem with him." Izuku thought back to the bounties of the other world. The proposition sounded exactly like doing bounty hunting pro bono. Sounds an awful like I'm the one doing you a favor here. They're behind the release of the drug trigger. The same drug that we suspect Stain used to knock out the entire city of Hasu. Izuku furrowed his brows at that. Stain's haki was barely enough to knock out Ida and Native. How would he have the strength to? And then it hit him. He had knocked out the whole city, and everyone thought it was Stain. As his face turned ashen, the representative said, "I see you recognize the ramifications of this new drug. Do you have any reservations about helping out now?" "None." "Good. I'll contact Sir Nightai immediately and have you and Mirko added to the raiding team. Hawks will try to line up a one-on-one between you and Overhaul if it isn't part of the plan, so pay attention to any cues he gives you. Understand?" Izuku didn't entirely hear what she said. His head felt like it was packed full of cotton, muffling the world until it blurred into a haze of television static. The representative called his name, and he heard it distantly, like he was far, far below the ocean waves. "I think I should go back to sleep," Izuku said, mind and body operating on autopilot as the full ramifications of causing, even indirectly, the deaths of a few hundred people. Maybe he would wake up, and it was all a dream. Or maybe he would wake back up in the other world and find the DeLorean sunken beneath the waves, or destroyed by Kizaru, or… Dimly, Izuku realized his head sank into a pillow. Despite the sheer exhaustion Izuku felt at that moment, his eyes refused to drift close. He remembered all the people he saved during the Hasu attack. Did they make it out? Did his haki kill anyone? When Izuku snapped back to reality, sometime later, he wasn't sure if he had drifted off to sleep or simply stared at the ceiling until his brain rebooted. When he sat up, wincing at the sharp stab of hunger in his gut, Ida looked up from his book and said, "Midoriya, are you feeling better?" "I am, I think." Izuku rubbed his forehead. "How long was I out of it?" "You mean after you got back from talking with the HPSC? It's been a day." "Ain't that the truth?" Izuku grumbled. Izuku felt somewhat more alive after scarfing down the thin bowl of kanji brought over by a nurse. But all the meager fare does is provide context for exactly how much food it'll take to satisfy his stomach. "Hey Ida, mind apologizing to the nurse for me? I'm going to get a bit of air." "Wait, Midoriya." As weak as Izuku felt, he slipped through the hospital with barely a sound, using Soru and Jeppo to fly past the patients and hospital staff like a spring breeze. He was already out the front doors before the doctor on the 4th floor could shout for him to stop. Izuku checked his pockets, which were empty. That left him with the option of heading home or filching food from Yua. Part of him yearned to go back home. But knowing what happened at Hasu, he couldn't quite bring himself to face his mother yet. That, and he needed to have a word with Nezu. The school was empty, and there was no lunch rush in the kitchen. But the walk-in fridge was well stocked with cured meats, chopped vegetables, and frozen rolls. The bread came out more mushy than anything else after he electrified it, but it made an edible enough meal. Over the intercom, Nezu said, "I had refreshments ready in my office." Izuku was there 2 seconds later, scarfing down scones. "How'd you know I was coming?" he asked between bites. "Intuition." "So, are you here because of Hasu or the HPSC? Does All Might have a transferable quirk?" Nezu grinned. "Sounds like the HPSC is getting desperate." "Did they tell you about All for One as well?" Izuku nodded. Nezu sipped his tea and said, "And they didn't even make you sign an NDA? Sloppy." "Oh well. They said they were coming after me because they were worried you would use me to chip away at their authority." "Of course I am. But tell me, Izuku, you've seen some of what they're willing to do to keep that power. Do you think they should have it?" For that, Izuku had no answer. Instead, he asked, "What will we do about All for One?" "You intend to fight him?" "I plan on being the #1 hero." "The #1 villain sounds like the perfect opponent for me. I'd chide you for being far too optimistic if I didn't think you had a very real chance of taking him down, especially given the rumors he isn't back at his full strength." All Might caved in his skull. That he's still breathing is a miracle of quirks and medicine. "I don't know if I plan on changing that. I'd rather not kill anyone if I can help it." "Admirable. I'm sure we can accommodate him just fine in Tartarus. So, what do we do in the meantime? How can we track him down?" "The easiest method would be identifying the mole amongst your classmates." Izuku felt a lump in his throat. "You think someone helped them with the Ust attack?" "Undoubtedly. All Might's presence at Yua was a recent change and closely held secret. Yet, on the 3rd day of class, the villains used a media scramble to break into the school and acquire the itinerary for the rescue training. Incidentally, it was the day after your class and 1B had their first lecture with him. While I admit it would be possible that the staff could have leaked this information, they could have just as easily furnished the itinerary to the villains without the risk of a break-in. Upperclassmen could have overheard whispers of All Might's presence, but I'm less inclined to believe that All for One would act on mere rumors. Thus, the most probably culprits are among the first-year heroic students." "Why are you telling me all this?" because you're the most probable target of all for one's next move. If the HPSC is convinced you have one for all, odds are he will believe the same. And given the fact that the quirk grows stronger with each wielder, while he has only grown weaker, he will feel pressured to nip it in the bud, so to speak. You need to be careful what information you share with your classmates, and watch for anyone making unusual attempts to get close to you, searching through your belongings, or asking for intimate details about your abilities. Izuku closed his eyes. He didn't want to imagine any of his classmates as traitors, but with the way they treated him, it was all too easy to see them selling him out. Yet, the thought of shoving them away, of watching for knives behind their backs, didn't sit right with him. Thank you for telling me this, but let them. Nezu frowned. Don't underestimate All for One. If he takes your quirk, I don't think anyone would be able to stop him. Izuku grinned, and Nezu froze, like a rodent before the gaze of a hawk. Electricity crackled around him as he said, I'd like to see him try. Mei stood tense, hunched over a thin spiral shell of carbon fiber. Her eyes twitched, the reticules in her corneas twisting slowly as she brought the artificial dial into closer and closer focus. Every microscopic imperfection in the metal lay bare before her gaze, and with the subtlest brushes of the soldering iron, she nudged individual atoms into place. Her eyes itched from pushing her quirk so far, but she worked through the pain. The first few explosions were a lot of fun, especially the one where a scrap of shell punched through Power Loader's helmet and shaved a strip down his scalp. But between the hundreds of failures littering her scrap box and her dwindling supply of dials from another world, Mei rolled up her sleeves and set about doing everything perfectly. And apparently, when it came to dials, perfection went down to the atomic level. Satisfied that she had made as perfect a copy of a flame dial as humanly possible, Mei set down the soldering iron, wiped the sweat off her brow, and took her newest baby over to the bomb room. It had a different name once, but pockmarked with craters as it was, with an odor reminiscent of gunpowder and ash clinging to the air. Everyone now called it the bomb room. It had steel-lined walls, with concrete a foot thick surrounding it. Mei set an acetylene torch firing on one end, set the flame dial in front of it, and sealed the room. Cameras perched in the corners gave her a close view as the dial absorbed the ambient flame, but zooming in showed her pixels instead of atoms. Excuse-moi, would you be? Mei held up a finger. With the press of a button, she killed the acetylene and watched the flame dial. Grabbing a pair of tongs off the wall, she slowly pried open the bomb room, took a quick whiff to check for any gas leaks, then grabbed the dial with the tongs. Keeping the door between her and the dial, she gingerly pressed the button. When she dared look, she saw a jet of flame licking the steel inside the bomb room. Once it ran out, she set it back inside, slammed the door shut, and turned to greet her guest. Hatsum Mei, future owner of Hatsum Industries and greatest inventor alive. How can I help you? Aoyama flushed slightly. I have a problem with my quirk, and I need support gear to use it effectively. I heard you were the best in the school, and… Say no more, I have just the thing. Rummaging through her baby collection, she pulled out a massive grenade launcher. Featuring Baby 196, the Master Blaster 3000, or whatever works well with your hero name. A smart grenade launcher packing 10 different kinds of non-lethal ammunition, from EMPs to flashbangs, smoke grenades, sticky webs, tasers, sneezing powder, and more. The grenades can be set to detonate on impact, with a timer, or manually. The launcher can also coat the grenades in a sticky substance, or made more rubbery for extra bounciness. A laser sight, smart aiming, and self-adjusting projectiles gives this baby an effective range of 0.5 kilometer. With this, you won't need a quirk to make waves as a professional hero. Aoyama staggered under the launcher's weight when Mei handed it to him. Grunting each word out, Aoyama said, Magnifique, I'm sure, but I was looking for something for my quirk. Of course. Just leave your quirk's details, and I'll have something cooked up in a week. Stomach pain, you said? Is it from neuron stimulation or blood pressure fluctuations? I don't know. Find out. Oh, and get me your measurements as well. All of them. I'll have recovery girls send them. Good. Anything else? Ayama hesitated. Just curious. What's the craziest invention? Baby. The craziest baby you've ever made. That would be the time machine. The time machine. Built one out of a DeLorean. And you've used it. Yep. Kinda wish I could use it again, since I'm running out of supplies. But Nezu has it locked away. Mei shrugged. Well, I'm having more fun inventing a solution anyways. I see. Seems like a shame. Do you think you'll ever get it back? After I graduate, probably. But I'll have to promise not to use it for evil or something. A massive blast rattled the walls of the bomb room. Mei opened the door. The dial was embedded in the steel wall, still intact, while the acetylene torch, melted to a lump of metal, had twisted fragments scattered across the room. Whoops. I think it melted the fuel line. Buy new customer. Mei wriggled into a bulky, explosion-resistant suit and waddled into the room. Ayama waited until he was off of the school's campus before texting what he had learned to the number All for One had given him. Nightai was already nursing the beginnings of a tension migraine when the phone on his desk started ringing. Inwardly sighing, Nightai picked up and said, "Sir Nightai speaking. No need to sound so glum, Mr. Sasaki. I come bearing gifts for once." Nightai pinched his nose. He could already tell the HPSC agent wanted something from him, and he had enough on his plate as it was. I appreciate any gestures of goodwill from the HPSC, but unless it's information on the Shai Hasakai, I'm afraid anything else would do more harm than good for the investigation. I have that and better. We've located their main R&D facility for a new drug they're testing out. You will have a warrant to raid them within the week, expedited through the legal system, so they will have less time to prepare, as well as the support of Ryukyu, Hawks, and Mirko. Mirko? Are you sure she will be suitable for such an operation? Perhaps not. But the real reason she's being brought on is her intern. It's incredible how quickly he's become proficient with One for All. Nightai nearly dropped the phone. One for All? He asked, hoping his voice came off as skeptical. Is that supposed to mean something? You don't need to pretend for me, Mr. Sasaki. We've been in the fight against All for One as much as your old mentor. As for Midoriya, I trust that All Might has filled you in on his progress. Of course, he said, fighting to keep the bitterness from his voice. He has done very well. And this raid will hopefully be another step on his road to succeeding All Might once he passes the torch. After a brief pause, in which Nightai was left to stew in the reminder of Tashinori's impending death, the agent said, "Speaking of, considering how important Midoriya will be to Japan's future, it would be appreciated if you could check into his future. You know why I can't do that? Just a thought. Any amount of information could be helpful. When he succeeds All Might, how it happens. If you find out anything useful, please give us a call." Nightai was left listening to the empty hum of the dead line. He set the phone down and turned to face the All Might poster hanging from the wall. All Might. He took his glasses off and ran his hands through his hair. Why don't you ever listen to me? At the entrance, Izuku took a deep breath, fortifying himself for his first step into the field of heroics. Mirko gave him a smirk and said, "Nervous, Sparky?" "A bit, yeah." Mirko scoffed. "You fought the hero killer and a bunch of Namu Mano a Mano, but a PowerPoint presentation makes you nervous." In lieu of replying, Izuku opened the door. A few familiar faces greeted him, from his classmates Takoyami, Kirishima, and Ochako, to bigger heroes like Ryukyu and Fatgum. Most heroes were harder to recognize, either hailing from underground heroics or smaller local agencies. Kirishima and Dark Shadow gave him eager waves, and Takoyami subtly inched aside to make room at the seat next to him. Mirko scoffed as she sized up the rest of the heroes seated in the massive meeting room. What a mess. I swear, half this team's thrown together with whatever the HPSC could scrape off the bottom of the barrel. One of the heroes, overhearing her, turned and glared at her. You're welcome to leave, if you're not going to take this seriously. Mirko made a show of mulling it over. Nah, someone's gotta show you how it's done. I sincerely hope not. Hawks strolled in, wings fanned wide, with a bucket of chicken tucked under one arm. I'd hate to see any other heroes following your less than personable example. Better that than all of them bending over and taking it like a good little government stooge. Sensing the hostility in the room mounting and wanting nothing to do with it, Izuku said, You're here because the HPSC asked you to. Doesn't that also make you a government stooge? Hawks nearly choked on a piece of chicken. Mirko feigned a blow to the heart and said, Betrayed by my own intern? No wonder why I've never taken on any brats before. A heavy slap of papers hitting the podium up front drew every set of eyes towards Sir Nighthigh. The precognitive hero gave Mirko and Hawks an exhausted glower and said, Seeing that we are already past the meeting's starting time, I would appreciate it if you would all be seated and silent. Hold all questions until the end. As Sir Nighthigh went over the known layout of the Shy Hasakai base, their operations, and their personnel, Izuku took careful notes, memorizing every detail. He felt jumpy and tense, excited and nervous for his first real mission as a hero. Each of them had a role, from Rukyu covering the exit, to Hawks intercepting any runners and Mirko acting as a human wrecking ball. Izuku felt his own stomach twist when it was revealed he would be spearheading the operation, charging forward until he found Overhaul and took him out. The intangibility their quirks provide make Viridian and Lemillion both ideal for confronting Overhaul, as his quirk requires physical contact. Anyone else who runs into him should report his location and retreat. Are you seriously leaving the most important job to a couple of kids? They aren't even out of high school yet. Nighthigh raised an eyebrow at the hero. I would invite you to challenge Overhaul yourself, but I have enough paperwork on my desk as is. Does anyone else have any objections? Rukyu shifted in her seat. Then she cleared her throat and said, I recognize your point, but I think it foolhardy to send those two in alone. Shouldn't they at least have backup from Mirko or Hawks? Mirko is a close quarters specialist. Overhaul is a terrible matchup for her. Mirko bristled, though she held herself back from objecting. And Hawks would have trouble maneuvering underground. When that didn't make Rukyu stand down, Nighthigh added, I am already making concessions by adding Lemillion as backup. The HPSC had requested that Midoriya, hero named Viridian, confront Overhaul by himself. That comment drew a whole host of angry mutters from the assembled heroes. Takoyami gave him a silent, wondering look, and Izuku felt vaguely uneasy at the attention. With all that out of the way, the operation begins tomorrow. Any patrol routes you have will be reassigned or dropped, and any other engagements you've had will need to be cancelled. I think you all understand the reason behind the sudden haste. A few heroes grumbled, but none objected. The heroes each fielded questions of their own about their matchups with villains, the publicity they could expect, and how involved the police force would be. Mirko had left halfway through the Q&A session, and Izuku felt torn between following after his assigned hero and staying for the rest of the meeting. As he mulled over what to do, he sensed a flicker of movement behind him. He tensed, but the shadow simply slipped a note onto Izuku's seat. Opening it inside his notebook, he found it simply read, Want to chat for a bit afterwards. He had never talked much with Takoyami, but he was one of the few who stood against removing him from 1A. Meeting his eyes, Izuku nodded and folded the note shut. With the last of the questions answered, Sir Nightai dismissed them all. As Izuku was leaving, the hero called out, "Viridian, might I have a moment of your time?" Tokoyami gave Izuku a quick nod and slipped out. Izuku sighed and said, "Yes, sir." Izuku paused at the entrance to Sir Nightai's office. His fervor for All Might had faded beneath the sunlight of another world, but he could still appreciate the sheer value, rarity, and condition of the merchandise on display. The office felt like a temple, with posters for stained glass windows, figurines of all sizes in place of statues, and an All Might tablecloth laid over the desk like a decorative altar. Sir Nightai, observing Izuku all the while, gave him an approving nod. "It gladdens me to see such respect for All Might's legacy in his successor." Izuku caught a faint whiff of bitterness in his words. "It's a bit soon to call me the number one hero, isn't it? Did All Might tell you to keep it a secret from me?" Izuku realized a few things in that moment. 1. The HPSC had told him about their theory. 2. That he hadn't talked to All Might about it. And 3. Sir Nightai had strong feelings about it. "He had not informed me who it was safe to discuss it with," Izuku said. It was technically the truth, but it still stung with the guilt of a lie. Sir Nightai turned to face the largest poster in his collection, the one that loomed over his desk. "I was his intern throughout my education at UA, then I was his sidekick until I formed my own agency. I was one of the few people he trusted with his secret, one of the few that fought alongside him to rid the world of All for One. I thought that he valued my opinions, that he respected me as a fellow hero. Yet, when it came time to make a hard decision, when his own life was on the line, he refused to listen to me. You being here, with his quirk, after I swore to help him find and train his successor, is the greatest slap in the face he could have ever given me." He turned back around and cleaned off his glasses. "However, you are not to blame for his actions, and I refuse to hold them against you. Just know that I am at your service, should you ever need it." Guilt slammed into Izuku like a sledgehammer, and for a brief moment, Izuku felt an overwhelming urge to tell Sir Nightai the truth. However, he didn't know how close the hero was to the HPSC. He couldn't risk them digging into the real reason behind his powers, stumble into another world, and draw the eye of the Marines. "I appreciate it," Izuku said instead. "And I'm sorry you went through that. There's no use in dwelling on the past. Let us discuss the future." He pulled back the sleeve of his coat, exposing his hand before Izuku's eyes. "I have a precognitive quirk that works off of tactile contact, though how it works and how far it can see aren't public knowledge. I have guesses, but they're only that. You're well informed. Specifically, I see events spool out like a film reel, for as far forward as I care to look. Going farther into the future makes it difficult to parse through individual frames, but I can manage about a decade before it gives me a migraine." Questions leapt to the tip of Izuku's tongue, but the somber tone of the room kept him from asking them. Instead, he asked, "Do you want to see mine? If you would, it would put my mind at ease if I knew no harm would come to you from spearheading the operation. And if it did, you would change your actions and have me fight someplace else," Izuku reasoned, "and would therefore change what you see until you see a desirable outcome." Sir Nightai frowned. If only it were that simple. Still, one can only hope. Izuku held out his hand. Nightai brushed his palm with his fingertips, and behind his eyes, Izuku could see a golden flicker, like an ancient projector whirring away in his skull. Seconds ticked by, minutes stretched out, and still, Sir Nightai did not move. Izuku was wondering if he should tap the hero or try to find help when Nightai stumbled back into reality with a shuddering gasp. "Sir Nightai, are you all right?" The hero gasped for breath. He wiped beads of sweat off his brow with a handkerchief and clutched his throat to keep himself from vomiting. "Was it something I did?" Izuku asked, on the verge of panic. "Was it my quirk? Did I somehow shock you by accident?" Sir Nightie's gaze flicked up to him, and the hero tensed before he forced himself to relax. I am not sure. Regardless, there's no permanent harm done, and you had done nothing wrong. I will simply be more careful in the future. Do you need anything? Should I call anyone? No, there's no need for that. Nightie looked around in a daze. When he saw the mug sitting on his desk, he drained the whole thing in one gulp. Catching his breath, he asked, "Tell me, Midoriya, what do you want most in the world?" Caught off guard, Izuku threw a grin on his face and said, "Ain't to be the #1 hero. I made a promise to my friends." "I see." Sir Nighteye straightened and adjusted his shirt. "You may leave. I have a few calls I need to make." Feeling disturbed, Izuku gently closed the door behind him. Walking outside, he hadn't expected Takoyami to still be lingering at the agency. Yet his classmate was waiting in the shadow of the building. "Sorry about that," Izuku said. "He wanted to make sure I was comfortable leading the raid." "Right." Takoyami shuffled awkwardly. "So, how is your internship going?" From behind him, Dark Shadow slapped its own face. Izuku chuckled and said, "Mirko's been great. I feel like I've been getting stronger, and I'm learning a lot as well." Takoyami spent a second imagining an even stronger Izuku and shuddered. "I'm glad for you. My own internship doesn't feel the same." "You have hawks, right?" "I do. And we've been going out on patrols almost every day." "That's good. You're getting experience." "I wish I was." What happens instead is, Hawks flies off and mops up every criminal in the area, while I help the sidekicks load them into police cars. I can't even come close to keeping up with him. If my internship has taught me anything, it's that I have a long way to go before calling myself a hero. Well, if mobility is your problem, you could always look into support gear. I bet May would have something cooked up for you before you could blink. Takoyami scratched at his feathers. "I suppose, but I wouldn't want to rely on a piece of equipment. I want to be able to fly like Hawks does." With a pointed glance, he added, "Like you do." "I'm not sure how much I can help with that," Izuku said nervously. "My quirk isn't exactly something you can copy." "It isn't. But it isn't the only way you can fly around, is it? There's what you do with your lightning to fly. But most of the time, it looks more like you're hopping through the air. You also mentioned in class that some of what you could do didn't have to do with your quirk." Izuku sighed. "You're right. Hopping on air is something, in theory, that I could teach you. I tried teaching Kirishima. Recovery Girl threatened to skin me alive if I ever tried it again. Then you can't help me." "Not with that, no." Izuku speculatively studied Dark Shadow. "But what about your quirk? Can they fly?" Dark Shadow brightened at being addressed. "You betcha. Though, I gotta stick close to Fumi-chan." Takoyami bristled at the endearing name, and Dark Shadow made a face back at him. Before the two could start fighting, Izuku asked, "Can you carry Takoyami?" Dark Shadow grinned and scooped him up. "Sure can, though he's a lot heavier than I am, and I have to push off the ground." "Then is there a way for you to flap your wings and hold Takoyami at the same time?" Teen and Quirk exchanged glances. "I suppose, but no, it's worth a try. You have my thanks, Midoriya. Anytime. See you at the raid tomorrow. And what a mad banquet of darkness it will be. Safe travels." After a nearly sleepless night tossing and turning, strategizing and scribbling in his notebooks, Izuku gave himself a small jolt to wake himself up, presented himself at the Night Eye Agency, and followed the assembled heroes and police to the Shy Hasakai hideout. The raid had been something of a letdown. It started impressively enough, with a hulking, energy-stealing brute fist fighting a dragon. The energy-stealing proved no obstacle for someone who could outspeed the drain, and a single second gear uppercut to the jaw knocked his lights out. Inside the labyrinth, The walls immediately moved to shuffle them around. But Izuku felt the hostile presence lurking in a corner and zapped it. A short, squat man tumbled out of the crumbling concrete and passed out at a policeman's feet. The Yakuza had evidently expected them to have trouble with the moving tunnels, as the hero raid caught them with their metaphorical pants down. Villains hauling boxes into getaway vans scrambled to confront the forces united against them and swiftly went down. Izuku ignored the chaff, brushing past bullets and quirk effects to pursue the man running off with a scarred little girl. Overhaul turned, hand whipping out, smirking as his fingertips approached Izuku's chest. Be cleansed from this world, filth. Overhaul's fingers passed through his chest. The Yakuza boss had a single second to process his dilemma before Izuku broke the arm holding the girl, gently nudged her aside, and fried Overhaul with every volt he could muster. Smoke curled from his singed hair and clothes as Overhaul collapsed to the floor. Eri gazed up at him in wonder. You didn't disappear when he touched you. Nope. That's because I'm made of lightning. Want to touch? Eri reached out, then anxiously pulled her hand back. I shouldn't. People vanish when I touch them too. Overhaul couldn't do it, right? It'll be fine. Hesitantly, Eri reached out, and her fingertips grazed Izuku's shirt. Izuku waited patiently until Eri sank her fingers in. She swished her fingers around and marveled at the sparks dancing around. It tickles. It sure does. Hey, do you want a piggyback ride? And that's how Sir Nightai and the other heroes, finally catching up after apprehending every Yakuza member, found Izuku carrying Eri on his shoulders, telling stories about pirates and marine admirals, and absently kicking a thug reaching for his ankle. Did you know there would be a girl down here? Izuku asked Sir Nightai. The sudden chill in his voice made all the heroes shudder. Sir Nightai covered for his lapse in composure by adjusting his glasses. I had, though given I had foreseen everything turning out well in the end, I felt it was better not to mention it, as it might change the outcome. Or that was the outcome you saw, because you told me she was here, Izuku shot back. I don't know why she's here, but she has scars on her arms, and they don't look like an accident. If I had known she was here, I wouldn't have waited for the raid to start. Sir Nightai fell on the receiving end of a few glares from Mirko and Ryukyu, among other heroes and cops. Bowing his head, Sir Nightai said, I recognized that leaving her in the Yakuza's hands any longer than strictly necessary was in poor taste, but I could not compromise the mission. That said, if anything like this ever comes up again, I will mention it. Good. Looking up at Eri, he asked, Are you hungry? Eri stuck a hand in her mouth, torn about answering. Izuku gave her a gentle pat and said, They're not going to hurt you. It's okay to ask for food. Oh, then yes please. What's your favorite thing to eat in the whole world? I don't know. Well, let's go find out. Before anyone could stop him, Izuku soared out of the Yakuza hideout. As sparks flickered in Izuku's wake, Sir Nightai frowned after him. Mirko slugged him on the shoulder. Kind of a dick move, 4 eyes. You should have said something. Rubbing the shoulder, Murray said, I had to be sure. And, to be honest, part of me was hoping what I saw was wrong. At that, Hawks tensed, though Mirko was facing the wrong direction to notice. As the heroes and police wrapped up the crime scene, Hawks slipped Nightai a slip of paper with a phone number. Murray watched from a bird's eye view as an earthquake wreaked havoc across New York City. Heroes scrambled to evacuate civilians out of collapsing skyscrapers and triage the wounded, and people scrambled to rescue food and belongings before their homes fell apart. He wouldn't have even recognized the city if it weren't for the Statue of Liberty, standing defiant even as the oceans heaved and roiled around it. The salt water made its oxidized surface gleam like polished aquamarine, and its torch held aloft caught glimmering sun rays and sparkled. Even as the earth trembled and the seas thrashed against the city's shores, a greater disaster loomed over the horizon. A massive storm front stretched across the entire horizon, rimming the city in a chilly shadow. Flickers of green lightning danced from cloud to cloud, casting the ocean in an emerald glow that made it look like a vat of frothing acid. The wind howled, and the sun dimmed as the clouds rushed in unnaturally fast, like a pillow smothering the life out of the city. Street lights flickered on, and the people redoubled their panicked efforts to run from the end of the world. Once the veil drew over the city and snuffed out every last speck of the sky, the clouds parted. A towering being, vaguely resembling a man, as if a titan had clumsily sculpted lightning into its shape and couldn't quite keep its form distinct. One foot crashed down into the harbor, swamping Lady Liberty in an impromptu tsunami. "Need power," the giant bellowed. Streetlights shattered and windows blew out as the entire electrical grid of the city flowed into the giant. More, need more. The electrical grid had no power left to give, but that didn't deter the giant. Lady Liberty, for one resplendent moment, shone in its original copper color, standing defiantly against the giant as America's protector, with a tablet for a shield and torch held aloft to strike down the invader. Then the copper disintegrated, rendered into plasma as the giant stripped the electrons off of every atom. The sea hissed and bubbled, the buildings peeled apart like old wallpaper, and even the ground drifted away like dust. The people had stopped running away. They stood in throngs, watching their end unfold, with belongings held limply in their arms and children clutched tightly to their chests. Heroes milled about them, checking for any wounded and lost, but even they grew still before the giant. Having drained the city dry, the giant turned its glowing eyes towards the people. One arm reached out, as if offering a helping hand. Lightning leapt from its fingertips. It struck a family, and they disappeared in a flash. Snuffed out. Gone. The people barely had time to register what had happened when the giant spread its fingers wide. Lightning raced out, vanishing each person it touched, until all that remained of New York was a flat, desolate plain. Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles. The giant swept across the country, draining the power and landscape dry and zapping every person it could find. Its form grew larger with every person it consumed, and by the time it scoured the West Coast barren, its form stretched across entire states. The U.S. made its final stand at Hawaii. The naval base there had jets on standby, ready to take off at a moment's notice. Ships floated in formation outside the harbor, pitching and leaning with the massive waves churning the ocean. At its heart stood a thin, frail star and stripe, with her hero costume hanging limply off her shrunken form. Even as the earth cracked and trembled, she stood tall, bearing the weight of the world on her shoulders. In a flash, the jets and boats disappeared. The entire military compound blew away in the wind, and every soldier there disappeared, save one. Kathleen looked up, fists clenched, face pale, struggling to hold the whole world together. "Did I find everyone?" the giant asked. "You did. I'm the last one left." "Good." The giant, not even humanoid at this point, but a massive, incoherent blob engulfing the sky, touched the island, as if kneeling before her. "Are you ready?" Kathleen hesitated. "There's nothing left to protect, is there?" "Then I release my hold on the world." Her shoulders relaxed. A ripple spread through the planet. Cracks split the continents, and the oceans boiled. "That just leaves Japan, doesn't it?" The giant nodded. "I don't think I'm strong enough. I still need more power. Then I have one last thing to try before I go." Kathleen Bates' last words were lost in the cacophony of the world's demise, but its effects were not. The formless ball of lightning quivered. It glowed like a verdant sun, condensing into a mythical figure, with antlers stretching like forks of lightning, scales like sparks hammered into plate, and hooves that clapped against the ground with the sound of thunder. The massive Kirin planted its hooves, anchoring a single slice of Hawaii in place, as the rest of the world crumpled in on itself. The horned giant knelt, touching its horn to star and stripe, and she vanished in a burst of green lightning. As the scene faded away, Sir Nightai saw the Kirin turn towards him. Its eyes widened in surprise, and a bolt of lightning shot towards him. Murray bolted out of bed. Gasping for air and sweating profusely, Murray stumbled on shaking legs for the bathroom. After dousing his face in the sink, his eyes darted across the room. He still didn't understand what he saw or how it could come to be. But that was Izuku's future, and that was Izuku's power destroying the world. Who could he tell? Would All Might listen to him when he failed to heed his warnings 5 years ago? Would Nezu listen when he was clearly hiding something about the boy? Who else had the resources to halt a world-ending disaster? Sir Nightai dialed the phone number Hawks gave him.